The letter wasn't just a bill, it was a declaration of war. Thick cream paper, HOA letterhead embossed like it was some royal decree, and right there in bold, total fines due, $250,000. My hands shook as I read the breakdown: parking violations, unauthorized exterior alterations, failure to seek event permits, even unapproved guest behavior. And there at the bottom, the smug scrawl of HOA President Karen Fletcher, the woman who seemed to breathe solely for the purpose of making other people's lives miserable. It would have been laughable if it weren't so calculated. They weren't just fining me. They were trying to bankrupt me. Karen had been circling ever since I moved in 6 months earlier. First, it was a warning for having my porch light on too bright. Then a citation for hanging a flag that wasn't HOA approved. Every encounter was the Samir wide frame blocking the sidewalk, chin tilted like she was peering down from a throne. But this was different. This wasn't about control anymore. This was a hit job. And the worst part was, she knew I was too new in the neighborhood to have any Elizer, so she thought. I called the number on the letter, the one listed for urgent HOA matters. Karen answered on the second ring, voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Oh, Mr. Dalton, I see you've received our notice. I do hope you understand this is standard procedure." I told her, flat and cold, that I wasn't paying a dime. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Then we'll see you in court. But I should warn you, our bylaws are ironclad." The line went dead before I could respond. She had no idea who she was dealing with. That night, I dug through every scrap of paperwork I'd received when I bought my house. The HOA covenant, property maps, the title charn, it all told the same story on the surface. The HOA owned and managed the common areas, with authority over the residents. But I've been in real estate long enough to know that surface stories hide cracks. And in this case, the crack was a chasm. It was buried in a dusty annex of the county land records, an old deed from 1974 transferring not just the land my house sat on, but the entire subdivision to a holding company. That holding company dissolved in the early 90s. And when no successor entity claimed the property, it reverted to Lotto, the last recorded private owner. That name? Mine. Not figuratively, legally. Every street, every lot, every scrap of common area Karen thought she ruled, I owned it outright. The realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. The HOA wasn't just powerless over Methy, were trespassing on my land every time they stepped outside their door. I called my lawyer, Mark Rivera, first thing in the morning. By noon, we'd drawn up a notice of ownership and a cease and desist order addressed to the HOA board. Mark grinned as he slid the papers across his desk to me. "You want to really twist the knife?" he said. "Serve this to them at their next public meeting." Which is exactly what I did. The HOA clubhouse was packed that night, the air thick with Karen's allies whispering about my reckless disregard for community harmony. She was on her little stage, reading through violation reports like a queen reading execution orders. When my turn came, she barely looked up. "Mr. Dalton, you're here regarding your outstanding balance?" I walked to the front, slow and deliberate, the way you walk when you know you're holding the winning hand. I placed the stack of legal papers on the podium in front of her and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "I'm here regarding your outstanding balance, for the unauthorized use of my property." She blinked. "Excuse me?" I turned to the crowd. "Every inch of land in this neighborhood, including the so-called common areas and the roads you drive on, is deeded to me. As of last month, I filed with the county to terminate all unauthorized governance over my property. Effective immediately, the HOA has no legal authority here." I could feel the room shift, the shock, the disbelief, and the slow dawning realization in the faces of people who'd lived under Karen's thumb for years. Karen tried to laugh it off, but her voice wavered. "That's absurd. We have bylaws. Breach of title overrides bylaws." I cut in. "And since your HOA never held legal title to the land, everything you've done here for the past decade has been under false pretenses. That's called fraud." The murmurs turned into open chatter. Someone in the back shouted, "Does that mean our fines are void?" Another voice, "Do we get our money back?" Karen slammed her gavel, trying to regain control, but the sound barely cut through the rising noise. That's when the twist dropped. From the side door, two men in dark suits stepped in county auditors. They'd been working with my lawyer for weeks, gathering evidence of the HOA's illegal collections. One of them stepped forward and addressed the room. "We have reason to believe this board has unlawfully collected over $1.2 million in fines and fees over the last 10 years. These funds will be subject to recovery." Karen's face drained of color, but she still tried to speak. "This is a setup. You can't." The auditor held up a hand. "Ma'am, please step aside. We'll be conducting a full audit starting tonight." The room erupted some cheering, some just sitting there stunned. I didn't wait for her to speak again. I turned, walked out into the cool night air, and felt the weight of months of harassment lift off my chest. But I knew the fight wasn't over, not yet. Karen didn't come back out after the auditors took over the clubhouse that night. The blinds stayed shut, but the glow of the office light flickered until well past midnight. I could imagine her pacing between the desk and filing cabinets, yanking open drawers, scanning documents, calculating which ones might save her and which ones might bury her. By morning, the smell of burned paper clung faintly to the air outside the clubhouse, like the ghost of a campfire. When I stepped out to get the paper, I saw a small group of neighbors gathered across the street. They weren't whispering now, they were talking openly, shoulders squared, heads nodding. Mr. Hernandez from the corner house waved me over. "You've got people behind you," he said simply. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of weight that comes when a whole community decides it's tired of living small. Mark called before noon with an update that made my coffee taste even better. "The county's in," he said. "They're opening the books. I don't think your HOA's going to survive the week." I could hear papers shuffling on his end, the click of a pen. "Also, we've got an ally, someone who's been watching this HOA for a while. She'll meet you this afternoon." He didn't say more, and I didn't press. The ally turned out to be Grace Ellison, a tall woman with windburned cheeks and eyes that scanned a room like she was measuring it for something only she understood. She stepped out of a mud-splattered pickup, shook my hand with a grip that told me she'd rather be holding a tool than a latte, and said, "My father built these streets. I'm here to help make sure they don't rot under greed." In her hands were maps and old plats from the 1970s, their edges frayed but the ink still bold. She laid them out on my dining table, tracing the original boundaries with a calloused finger. "Your deed is solid," she said. "But this shows the intent was never to give perpetual control to an HOA they lost title the moment the holding company dissolved. Everything they've done since is smoke and mirrors." It was like watching a puzzle snap together. All the harassment, the inflated fines, the threats, they weren't the actions of a legitimate governing body. They were a bluff, a con, dressed up in legalese and intimidation. And now, with Grace's documents, we could prove it wasn't just my property they'd been trespassing on. It was everyone's. That evening, the county auditors found the first smoking Guna lock drawer full of binders labeled Special Projects. Each binder contained lists of expedited approvals tied to cash payments, complete with notes about who paid, how much, and which violation was magically erased afterward. Karen's handwriting was all over them. Her loopy capital KS and the way she dotted her eyes with tiny circles were as distinct as fingerprints. By the time word got out, neighbors were lining up to share their own stories. An elderly couple who'd been fined for planting tomatoes too close to the sidewalk produced a letter Karen had signed waiving the fine right after they donated $500 to the HOA Landscaping Fund. A single mother recounted how she was billed $800 for an unapproved trampoline, only to have the fine vanish when she offered free catering from her small bakery for the HOA's annual party. Every story chipped away at the facade Karen had spent years polishing. 2 days later, we got the second break. One of the auditors had been combing through bank statements and spotted a series of transfers from the HOA account to a private one labeled CF Trust. The initials matched Karen's maiden name, Crawford Fletcher. Mark's voice was sharp when he called me. "This is more than civil fraud now. This is criminal." The next HOA meeting was the first in years where people showed up not out of fear, but curiosity and maybe a little hunger for justice. Karen sat at the head of the table, shoulders stiff, hair sprayed into a helmet. She opened her mouth to call the meeting to order, but Mark stepped forward and handed her an envelope. This is notice of a lawsuit filed on behalf of Mr. Dalton and, effectively, every homeowner here, he announced to the room. It alleges fraud, conversion, and unauthorized governance of private property. "Oh, hand you're being served, Ms. Fletcher." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Karen's jaw clenched so tight I thought she might crack a tooth. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out brittle. "This is ridiculous," she said, waving the papers like they were grocery coupons. "We've done nothing wrong. Our bylaws." "Your bylaws," Mark interrupted, "don't apply to land you don't own. And now the county, the state, and possibly the feds will have their say about the rest." The shift was palpable. The fear that had kept people quiet was gone. Questions started flying about refunds, about the legitimacy of past fines, about whether they could get rid of the HOA entirely. Karen banged her gavel, but each crack was weaker than the last. When the meeting ended, she tried to slip out the side door, but Grace was waiting there. "I don't know what she said." Grace spoke low, leaning in so close their foreheads almost touched, but whatever it was made Karen's eyes widen before she stomped off into the night. "That was the last time I saw her try to act like she was still in charge."